1. This happened 2 years ago during the summer, when I had joined my brother's family for a summer trip through the country. My brother had searched for a rest house where we could rest for a few nights. The price was relatively cheap, and we would have the whole apartment for ourselves. Upon entering the apartment, I immediately thought, okay, if there ever is an atmosphere of a haunted house, this has to be it. The air was so thick and heavy, almost oppressive. I'm sure there was some sort of a mold problem in the house. My brother's partner felt the heavy air too, and she even had some small areas that turned red at her wrist, indicative of a skin reaction to a possible mold problem. Whatever, we're only here for a few nights and then we will leave, I thought. I really didn't entertain the idea of spending nights in a house with a possible mold problem. I put my bag into a wardrobe in my room and shut it. It had a vintage-looking mechanism, because I didn't want my 2-year-old nephew to start searching for things in it. After all, I had my medicines, and also my cheap market-value one-use safety razor there. We opened the windows to get some breeze into the apartment. It helped nothing. At any rate, it was time to head out, so we left the bathroom window open. I decided to put a small bathroom porcelain decorative piece there, to hold the window slightly open. My brother came to look what I was doing and commented, "You sure you want to put that one there?" I looked at the fragile porcelain piece. "You're right." We decided to put a wooden piece instead there, a bit sturdier. I have to mention that it was quite a suburban area of a small city, and the window was situated at the back of the house. It was relatively safe for us to assume no burglars would enter the house. Besides, the window was too small for an adult to fit through. When we returned from our trip out several hours later, the window was wide open and the wooden piece was laying at the corner of the room, rolled there by the impact of the window having been pulled wide and the wooden piece having dropped to the floor and rolled to the corner. Must have been the wind. I told you not to use the porcelain piece. Everything was normal in the house, even the heavy atmosphere hadn't shifted anywhere. But I noticed that the wardrobe door in my room was slightly open. I was sure that I had closed it earlier. But hey, old locking mechanisms are old locking mechanisms, right? Night came and we started to sleep. But in truth, I found it really hard to fall asleep with the heavy atmosphere. That's when I started to hear it. There was an old-school wooden dish rack in the kitchen, where some decorative dishes were stored in a vertical position. These dishes had started to make sound, like someone was shaking the rack. And if I recall correctly, a faint thumping sound could also be heard from the basement. A large gathering of birds flew into the air from the trees near the house, making a distress sound. What the hell is going on here? Is there some kind of machine going on in the basement? Is there an earthquake? I thought. I had no idea since the basement door was locked, and I didn't dare to go investigate the kitchen area. Also, the country where we live has earthquakes extremely rarely. It's situated at one of the seismically most non-active areas in the world. And there isn't even a highway near the house, so a passing highway truck couldn't have affected the ground. 20 to 30 minutes later, the sound stopped and everything became quiet. I really needed to visit the toilet, which was right next to my room. Both of these were overlooking the kitchen area. I felt quite anxious while visiting it, but didn't think more of it. I then returned to my room and eventually fell asleep. The next day was surprisingly normal. We spent most of the day outside and only came back to the apartment at evening. The next night was also normal, since by now I had gotten used to the heavy air, so I fell asleep relatively quickly. By the way, my nephew never showed any signs of not liking the house. Upon leaving at the third day, I browsed through the guest book, but found no referencing to anything out of the ordinary. I asked the owners about the house. I discovered that the owner's parents had originally built it, and he and his wife had turned it into a rest house after their death. "It is the most delightful place," the wife commented in a proud tone. I dared not to mention of the weird things having happened there, as I didn't want to be disrespectful towards their memory. Besides, surely it had a logical explanation. Upon returning home, I started to unbag my baggage. That's when I realized, to my shock, that the safety razor in my baggage was missing its safety lid. The lid was found in another pocket altogether. For me, this was the last straw. There was no way I would put a fucking safety razor into my bag without the lid. And why in the hell would I put the safety lid into another pocket? The worst thing is that my nephew could have browsed the bag and hurt himself on this razor. I was glad to have stored it far away from him. But I couldn't have commented about this to my brother either, because he would have burst out laughing, judged me for being careless and stupid to even think the razor blade safety lid having moved by itself. He thought nothing about the happenings at the apartment. He and his partner simply laughed about it when I talked to him of the happenings during the first night. Anyway, that's my story. Lots of weird little things happening, but nothing conclusive if you ask me. For me, the whole experience reminded me of a stereotypical and cliché haunted house experience. 2. This happened around my sophomore year of college, about 3 years ago. This all took place over a week at Kenyon College in Ohio. I myself was attending the University of Akron. I was a camp counselor for a youth organization, and they would do an annual week-long retreat at Kenyon every summer. As a camp counselor, we'd arrive a couple days early and leave a couple days later, so we had some downtime to do some exploring. This was probably in the middle of me being most involved in ghost hunting, so, of course, I had brushed up on the local lore and stories. Other counselors joined me as we befriended campus security and got their input on the stories as well. After gaining their trust and approval, we pretty much had free rein on campus at night. Whether it was the dorms, cemetery, old churches or buildings, they would let us in. Some of their stories we didn't experience were: a man died in the old college pool, which was transformed into a dance studio. They were frequently experiencing intrusion alarms and finding wet barefoot prints on the ground. They would also see apparitions in the cemetery on campus and hear an unseen whistler whistling out some tunes in the church that held classes. This was summer, and the campus was basically vacant. A buddy of mine and I decided to stay in a dorm room where a murder-homicide occurred. The girlfriend apparently stabbed her boyfriend and tried to hide the body in an elevator shaft. After that, she took a plunge out of her 7th-story dorm room window. The first night there, a different friend tried to challenge the alleged ghost, and that was met with a thunderous slam against the window. The elevator would constantly take us to the 7th floor no matter which floor we pressed. Toilets and showers would go off by themselves, despite us being the only ones on the floor. Alarms had a mind of their own, and to top it off, if you shined a black light on the wall, there was a bunch of weird writing, in a style we had never seen. The last straw for us staying in that room was campus security came banging on our door, saying there was several 911 hang-ups from the room. Then eventually a woman spoke to them, saying send help, then hung up. There was no phone in the room. Things we experienced on campus were projectors moving and turning on by themselves, door handles rattling. A building where several students died in a fire had the fire alarm pulled and turned off. The only problem is that the only person that could turn it off was the security guard with us, and she didn't. A chandelier swinging while 2 others stood perfectly still. It was a hell of a couple of days. 3. I've had a fair few experiences. I can't say for sure they're paranormal. I'm a big believer in that our brain has untold power that can explain many of the things that have happened, but any of these experiences are up for interpretation. I'll start from the first I can remember and work my way through the years. Age 3 to 9. My first cat had been run over and killed when I was 3 and dragged back to my door by another cat. Ever since then, I've seen my cat, Pudgy, sit at my bedroom door and walk away when I chased it to disappear. It never disappeared in front of me. It just turned corners before I did and was no longer there. We moved around 5 times, but I still saw that cat in every house. Age 6 to 9, in a new house. It wasn't old, around 30 years old. This is England, that's nothing. My older sister had the first pick of the rooms, and she chose one with a cupboard in it. Inside it had a little window and a little shelf that I could easily sit on. The cupboard itself wasn't scary, but after a few months I refused to go into it. I don't know why, but my sister would push me towards it to scare me, and I'd throw an almighty fit if I got within 3 feet. Same house. The hallway outside our rooms faced my bedroom head on. The stairs had 2 steps at the top, a triangular step, and then they would turn out of eyesight. Many times I saw shadows dancing on the steps. Dancing, I assumed, because their shadow bobbed and weaved. It was not my mum or sister. Both their rooms were on either side of mine, and I slept with my door open. I also had a hard time sleeping at night, so I'd lie awake staring at the glow-up stars on my ceiling, and I hadn't heard or saw them make a noise at all. I also heard noises in that house, arguing, whispering, singing, and my name. Now I used to think it was my sister, until one morning I'd walked downstairs after hearing my name the night before, and saw my mum shouting at my sister for being out all night and rocking in at 7 a.m. After that I slept with my door closed, always. Age 10. While sleeping in my mum's room, I was a very scared child. I woke up to see a ball of cloudy blue light the size of a marble hovering in front of my face, bobbing up and down. It then flew backwards into the chimney breast. My friend and I were in my room playing with a dollhouse and Pokemon. It was usual for my mother, only myself and my mother lived together from then, to leave the house with me in it and go shopping or for a cup of tea at her friend's. So she wasn't in the house when myself and my friend turned to my bedroom door handle to see it being turned up and down frantically, as if someone was trying to get in. The door was open but didn't move. Not 30 seconds after, my mum walked in the front door. We called my mum up because we didn't want to walk through the door. She didn't believe us, but a week later it happened to her own bedroom door in front of her. The same house was a nightmare for me. For some reason, it made me incredibly nervous and scared, so I spent as much time as I could outside. The hallway was the worst. As you walk through the front door, the front room is straight to the left, with an L walkway to the right, to the bathroom and kitchen. The stairs were 5 feet in front of the door, and both directions led off to the left and right, so there was no real hallway upstairs, only a window directly in front of them, in between the rooms. Whether it was daylight or night, and I walked up there, I had the most horrible feeling in my stomach. Like I'd eaten a freezing rock, and I had to run, never even thought about it. I just always ran up the stairs as fast as I could, like a reflex. Age 12 to 15, my sister was in her new house with 2 of her children, and I frequently stayed there overnight. From the first week up until she left that house, I would dream every night of her 3rd bedroom, my nephew's room. Except it was no longer his room. 2 children, a girl my age and a boy around 7, would stand in the room and stare at me. I was standing in the room facing it, my niece's room. And though they didn't speak in the dream, I still knew what they said, or thought, or whatever it is. They would try to make me come to their room. But even in my dream I was shit scared, so I wouldn't budge an inch. They didn't want to hurt me, but they wanted me to be with them. They were both average looking, nothing special, normal clothes, normal faces. But the entire room, them included, were bathed in an odd blue light, as if strong moonlight was shining through a thin curtain. I never told anyone about it, and never will. To me, that was the worst experience after the wall thing. Age 14, we had moved yet again to a large flat, apartment, in the same city. Again, the hallway scared me. I'd see the shadows of feet beneath the crack of my door, constantly pacing. My door had a painted-over window thing at the top, and if the bathroom hallway light was on, I'd see something bobbing up and down. Again, I must say, I'm a very scared person when it comes to the paranormal. One part of my brain has a logical explanation, the other part is constantly screaming, "Ghost, ghost, ghost!" So because of this, from an early age till now, I sleep facing the wall. And if I feel like I'm being watched, which I always do, I will cover my head and refuse to move. In my bedroom I always felt a presence, and I'm not sure how to explain it, but it felt as if there was anticipation in my room, like when you're in a crowd all waiting for the music to start, and there's a feeling of anxious energy around you. It always came from one corner, and happened during the day as much as night. I had a built-in wardrobe in that corner, and I used to put a coat hanger through both handles because I was absolutely convinced something was trying to get out of it. Same place. I was asleep and facing the wall, and whether it was a dream or not I can't be sure. I woke up to stare at the wall, and in front of me, in the wall, was a black space the size of my head. It sucked all the light out of the room and forced me to stare at it. I couldn't move my eyes away at all, couldn't move an inch. I never saw anything inside of it, but I felt like something was trying to reach me and pull me in. And if I didn't move, it would happen. Now, the reason I don't know if I was dreaming is because I don't remember waking up after I woke up. I only remember staying still and watching until very early in the morning when the light came, and I pushed myself out of bed so hard I hit my back on my nightstand and knocked everything off. I couldn't sleep for weeks, moved my bed, slept everywhere except my room, and told no one for years. Never happened again. Age 23. My best friend and I went into a graveyard at night. We were bored, and she had dared me to. As much of a wuss as I am, I refused to back down from dares. It's a graveyard I frequently visited and still do. Peaceful, small. I can't remember what we went there to do. I think it was mostly to read names or something. After a while of filling around, hiding behind trees and scaring each other, we hear the sound of a baby crying. It sounded like a full-on painful cry, because the graveyard backs onto a garden. We both ran to the fence to see if there was a child in the garden. Nothing, no lights, crying stopped. It sounded like it was right next to us. As soon as the crying stops, we see flashlights from the community officers. Someone had probably heard us and called them. Now this next bit is unbelievable. Had I not seen it, I'd call bullshit. Here's some details about it first, though. At the very back of the graveyard there's a few feet of trees. Then there's a brick wall. It's around 3 feet tall from our side, but the other side has a 6-foot drop to stop people getting over it. Recently a car had ploughed into it and knocked around 3 foot of it down in one place, leaving a very sizable chunk gone. We planned to go through that hole, jump down, and run up the residential road and hide in a garden. I had personally checked to see if the hole was there before we had started messing around. There'd been a lot of vandalism recently, so police presence was expected. Ergo, I checked the escape route. It was there. However, when the flashlights and crying happened, and we ran to the hole, not one single brick was out of place, not a single one. We couldn't get over it. The 6-foot drop was too big for us. We had to duck and cover between headstones and make our way around the outskirts of the graveyard, and hop over the sectioned off wall that held the public toilets, and wait until the car had pulled off. My friend would never speak of it. Every time I mentioned it, she'd turn away and ignore me until I dropped it. Fast forward to now, age 25. In a new place again. Previous occupant was an old woman. I knew nothing of her, and was told she had moved to a care home and was alive. The place feels cozy and bright and not scary at all. The first place in my life to feel that way. Even after what's happened, it still does. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. The door is directly to my left, which leads into the hallway. The bathroom is again directly to the left of the door. My bedroom door is 3 feet to the right of the kitchen door. As I'm making a sandwich, at the corner of my eye, I see the top half of an old woman. She has a bright yellow cardigan on, and although I can't make out her face, I can see she has grey hair pulled back into a bun that sits at the crown of her head. She walks from my room, I assume, and into the bathroom, walking past the kitchen door. She isn't walking, I suppose. She isn't gliding either. It's hard to explain. It's as if she's all one level, slowly going past on a conveyor belt. I know it sounds stupid, but that's how it looks. I'm frozen, knife in hand, ready to stab it if it turns, but nothing happens at all. After a few minutes, I drop everything and leg it into the living room. Few months go by. I wake up to the sound of banging. It sounds like when you're a kid and you hold the stick to a gate and run. That annoying banging side, except it was against a radiator. I could see the radiator I thought it was coming from, but nothing was happening except the noise. The radiator had previously been bled and worked fine. The central heating wasn't on, so it wasn't water running through it. But it could have been a heating fault. I'm not sure. All I know is it went on for minutes and stopped exactly when my mother walked in the door. I've experienced a lot of feelings, seen a few other things, but most of it can be explained. My mum and sister, however, have seen some bizarre things. 4. There is an old abandoned hospital in Edmonton called Charles Camsell Hospital, and this happened to myself, my older brother, I'll call him Omar, and a couple of our friends. I was 18 at the time, and we had gone ghost hunting this one fall night, and we had gone to a cemetery that night, hoping to see something, and we spent about an hour or so there, when one of our friends said that there was this hospital nearby, and said that it was reported to be very haunted. We were getting nothing being at the cemetery, so we said sure, why not? It was still early, it was like 1:30 a.m. So we made our way to the hospital. My brother Omar drove there, and it was about 5 minutes away. We pull up to this hospital. It was fenced off with no trespassing signs posted all over. Now I do not condone trespassing anywhere. Make sure you get proper permission before doing any ghost hunts. But we were young and dumb, so yeah. Anyways, when we pulled up and got out of the car, we walked along the fence to see if we could get in somehow. That's when we heard some voices coming from the front entrance of the hospital. So we ducked down and silenced our voices. It was a bunch of teens roughly the same age as us who were being escorted out of the place by security. I'd imagine they have many vandals and teens looking for a thrill ride inside the hospital, so they had security patrolling the area and checking inside the hospital too. It was 2 security guards escorting them out, and they walked them back to their vehicle. We thought this was a great opportunity to get in. No security for a while, we thought. And an open space not 5 feet from us. So we quickly went through the small hole and went in. This place was spooky, I'll tell you. And dark. We had flashlights, obviously, and we headed through the main entrance and decided to go through the hospital floor by floor, starting from the basement. We went through with nothing happening, and it was pretty much a bust. Locked doors to some areas, and we were sure security would be coming around again soon. But before we left, Omar suggested we try one more floor up, and we agreed to it. Why the hell not, right? So we went up, and Omar didn't have a flashlight. It was dark and hard to see, but with the city lights and the moon illuminating inside a little, it was somewhat possible to walk around without a flashlight. He took the lead, being the oldest in the group. We followed behind with our flashlights. When we all heard giggling, it was faint, but we all heard it. We stood still to see if we could hear it again. We all heard it again, same giggle, but it was more audible. It had to be from a child, and we were getting a little freaked out. When all of a sudden, I see Omar dart straight down the hall. I ran behind him, and I asked him, "Omar, what the hell?" And he said he saw someone at the end of the hallway. I told him to slow down, for some reason. I felt uncomfortable about this situation. I don't know what it was, but something wasn't right. Omar was wearing a hoodie that night, luckily for him. I caught up to him, and grabbed him by the hoodie and pulled him back, dropping him to the floor because I had seen something in front of him that he must not have seen for whatever reason. "Dude, what gives?" he yells at me, and I said, "Omar, look." And I shined the flashlight about 2 feet in front of him. And there, right in the path he was headed, was a big hole in the middle of this, cross-section, where it leads to other corridors. He got up, and we stepped close to the edge, and it was straight shot down to the basement. And we were several floors up. Now I know it was the basement because it was completely flooded at the time, and I threw a stone or piece of cement down the hole, just to see how far down it went. And sure enough, we heard a splash at the end. After the stone hit the water, Omar and I heard a giggle again, and we looked up from the hole, and sure enough, on the other side of this massive hole was what I would say looked to be the figure of a little girl. And just as quickly as she was there, she was gone. Just gone again. I had my flashlight. I shined it in the direction of the little girl. But there was nothing, just a corridor with some hospital beds. That's it. I know it was a long story, but I'm glad you stuck with it. If you have any comments on whether or not this was something with malintent in harming my brother, leave a comment. I just feel I don't think he would be here today, or maybe he would, but he could have been severely injured in the fall. 5. I've got a few experiences of my own mostly, from after we moved house, live in Ireland, to the country. We lived in a bungalow in the Midlands. I had my own room, box room, nothing fancy, with a bunk bed up against the wall, to the right of the door and the window on the far left side of the opposite wall. These bits are relevant, I'll explain in a bit. One night in August 2000, I was 8. Would have been late in the night I woke up and looked out the window. From what I know now, it was the Banshee. Some people might be dubious, they have their own opinions, but from what I saw it corresponds to previous accounts. My grandma had a similar one out by Sandymount. The Banshee was like a fluorescent yellow, brushing its hair, and floating, that's what got me, kept coming towards the window, had its mouth open, flesh missing in parts of the face, and it wore what looked like a dress or nightdress. Anywho, I saw this coming towards the window and was stuck, half amazement and fear. Thinking back to it, it felt like I was being beckoned. Some innate feeling of needing to wait. Only when I realized what it was approaching the window did I bawl out for the folks. A few days later, a friend of my parents died. Heart attack on his tractor. We then moved a few years later to my mam's family home. Folks bought it. A few years ago, my dad and myself went into the house, having been out. We both heard someone run from the top of the stairs, across the landing and towards my folks' room, with child's footsteps. My brother was only young but still able to climb the stairs, so we thought, crap, maybe it's him or my younger sister. Turned out they were both still in the car. When we moved into the house initially, my parents told us this story of how, one night in the room below them, they heard children singing Ring-a-Ring-a-Rosy and laughing. There's been some crazy stuff, pipe smoke by the old fireplace, flashes of something in the corner of your eye and our shed. I've got some homemade gym out there, And man, there's something not right about it. As this feeling of being watched that all of us get when out there. My mum won't go in it at times because of it. I had another encounter last year with what I reckon is the banshee. We have an old mobile home we gave to my grandparents years back when they came to stay with us. I use it to study in when uni exams come around. This time I was out there working away on the laptop with some music playing. I heard some whining, wailing in the background. In fairness, this mobile home isn't in the greatest of shape. It's missing a second front door, and we do have cats. The only thing is, this wasn't like the cats wailing, as I've heard them before. It was mournful. As you can expect, the volume went up and I sat it out till it eventually dissipated. The following day, a local man who lives on a hill we can see from the house died. It's funny. I was talking to my sister last week and she reminded me, a few years ago I went to the States around July. She remembers waking up one night and looking out her bedroom door. It's a box room that's quite continuous with the landing. She looked out and saw this figure, pale, white, mouth open, gazing at her from the window next to my bedroom door. Needless to say, she doesn't like the window. Again, a neighbour died the following day. One more, and I'll leave you to it. My granda died in 2006. A few weeks later, I was in the sitting room reading the paper when I felt a pinch on my back. Checked the mirror, and there was nail marks in the skin. Funny thing was, my granda used to do it a lot to me as a kid. Plus, we were really close. My home is an 18th century Georgian farmhouse, so it's got the works. Just to say, I found paranormal stuff interesting, primarily due to a deep family history of such activity, particularly with the area where my house is located, as well as the house itself. I'm skeptical, generally, trained as a cynical scientist, and I'm eager to counter the usual, "Oh, it's a ghost" cliché. But living where I am, and from what I've experienced, leads me to wholly believe such is real. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 60. Big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. No, I don't think you probably won't be able to hear those dogs, but there's still dogs barking in the background. Well, where are we now? Friday, heading into the weekend. I'm going to be spending my weekend trying to narrow down these PC issues. I've been able to eliminate the motherboard, so that means that the only things I haven't tested are either the power source or the CPU. Is most likely the CPU, actually. Which means I'm probably going to have to try and get Amazon to replace it, because I've looked into it and I think that's how the returns take place. Although Amazon don't make it easy for you. You can't just go in and select, okay, item's faulty, need to return it. You've got to jump through a few hoops. You've basically got to go to the Contact Us section, and then you can either call them on the phone, or like I did last time I had a problem with this, you go into a chat with them. So I'm going to have to go into a chat with somebody and explain the situation. I have cancelled I was going to return, I thought it was the keyboard. In fact, I was fairly sure it was the keyboard, because CPUs rarely fail. But no, I'm leaning towards it's a faulty CPU. It's not performing as it should be, because I'm getting stuttering with games. It's not the graphics card, because that graphics card works fine. It's been tested in another system. I put another card in there as well to test that, and the cards are fine. So yeah. This is all completely unrelated to paranormal stuff. It's just me rambling on, so I'll shut up now. And with that, I'm going to head off. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.